Welcome to mini lecture number 6 at 7503 NSC Aviation Economics. This mini lecture we're going to be discussing the principles of airline route planning, scheduling and evaluation systems. So how does this fit in? Well, if you remember back in lecture 1 we spoke about the way in which first of all, the strategic planning model tells us as to what business we're going to be in, include that using our vision and mission, and also our strategies for achieving the gap that we have to close between the mission and the vision. Within the previous lectures, we've also looked at cost structure, service price offer, how we actually work out as to the service scape, what we're going to offer. But in this one, we're going into the airline planning model now, that model that we showed in mini lecture number 1, where we said this starts off working out with what routes are we actually going to be covering, and then going from there through that system, through the fleet planning and the scheduling, etc. So this one is an important one because we've now entered the airline planning model and going into the very specialised aspects of airline economics. That is, that part of economics that is very, very specific to airlines. And what we're going to be doing is taking a look at the route planning and evaluation process that supports scheduling, because of course scheduling is one of the outcomes once we know the routes we're flying. We're going to be talking about the advantages and disadvantages of hub and spoke scheduling. For those of you who've done airline management, you've done some of the principles of hub and spoke, but we're going to be talking about how it affects scheduling and the economic impacts. We're going to be looking at the 4 basic scheduling types and explaining how maintenance efficiency goals, flight operation factors, all of these other extraneous factors can affect our schedule planning and also our facility constraints. That is, if we've only got one turnaround crew on the ground to turn on an aircraft and we have 2 aircraft arriving at 2 gates at the same time, one of them's going to have to wait. We're going to understand the role of scheduling department in developing and coordinating the schedule planning process, and we're going to be talking about some of the unique problems facing schedulers. And when you look at it at an airline working in today's environment, there are so many things that can disrupt schedule, and the airline schedulers have to be able to respond to this to keep the operations flowing smoothly all the time, whilst at the same time keeping those costs down and getting the financial leverage of our load factors that we've studied when we studied airline metrics. So of course, in the previous mini lecture 1, we looked at the way in which the vision and the mission and the gap between the two gave us our goals, and we had strategies for achieving those goals. We looked at the route planning, fleet planning we'll be doing in the further lecture, and the schedule development. So again, route planning and schedule development go very much hand in hand, and then we saw these various other factors. Pricing we've spoken about, revenue management we've spoken about, sales and distribution we'll be talking about more in future lectures. This one we'll be talking a little bit about crew scheduling, later lecture airport resource management and operations control. So this model is going to be very much a repeating model that we use throughout the course. We're going to be taking a look at some of the key planning decisions, and that is, for example, once we know our routes, what's our fleet going to be? And that's a subject for another lecture. With the routes itself, where are we actually going to fly the aircraft to where they can be most profitable? For example, we want to fly routes where there's going to be lots of people wanting to fly. We don't want to fly routes where, in fact, it doesn't match the aircraft we've got. That is, it's a waste of time having 100 people being available for a flight when we've got a 200-seat aircraft scheduled to do that flight. We're going to be looking at the schedule development and finding out, well, is it better to have a 400-seat aircraft doing 1 flight per day, or have 4 100-seat aircraft doing the flight, so that there's a greater flexibility for passengers? And we'll find out that this can make the difference between actually making money and losing money. When we look at route planning itself, we have to take a look at a lot of considerations, and we will go into detail on things such as strategic considerations. Do we need to be seen to be operating in this route? Even though we may not make money on a particular route, is it important for the airline's actual image? What are the economic situations? We don't want to lose money wherever possible. And what are the practical considerations? That is, do we have links with other airlines where we don't actually have any infrastructure on a particular route? We'll be taking a look at the strategic importance itself, the economic importance, and the practical importance in much greater detail in the lecture. If we look at airline scheduling itself, if we look at the definition, it's the art of designing system-wide flight plans to provide optimum consumer service consistent with the carrier's financial requirements. Now, notice the operative word art. That is, we try to make it a science as much as possible, but the science can only go so far. There are certain things where humans have to come into the equation to actually design the schedule. And so whilst we will learn that without computerisation, airlines couldn't keep their complex schedule production, there is still an art as part of that. And of course, the one thing is a schedule can make or break an airline. That's one of the things, because the schedule is really saying, are you going where people want to go? And are you doing it with the frequency and times that people want to travel? So that's important. And we'll take a look at the schedule development framework, and we'll take a look at all the different factors that can operate. For example, what are the competitors doing compared to us? What are the internal factors? For example, what are the aircraft we've got? Can they fulfill the route by being able to fly the range that's required? What are the maintenance requirements? How often does the aircraft have to come in for maintenance? What are the flight operations? For example, pavement loadings, the fuel that we need to take on board. Will we need to do certain refuelling stops? What are the facility constraints? Do we have gates available? Do we have the ticket counter space? What's the baggage handling? All of these factors come in for an airline when it has to develop a schedule. What are the external factors? For example, what are the curfews at airports? What are the local communities say in terms of the service that they expect an airline to be able to provide to their community? What are the hotel and motel considerations? For example, what are their booking times? That is, we want the flights to be able to operate that fit in also with the accommodation at the other end. And how does our service fit with the air freight shippers? Because we said passenger aircraft fly a lot of freight as well. If we take a look now, we come to another process, and this has been developed by one of the very prolific authors on airline economics, Holloway, and we look at the model that he uses for schedule development. And it starts again with demand forecast. That is forecasting that we studied in a previous lecture. This is important. And we find, okay, what are the demand forecasts saying? What are our corporate objectives? That is, what's the business need that we're trying to fulfill from our strategic planning? Then we take a look at the segmentation, the route and the product planning. That is, what's going to be the number of first class seats, business class seats, economy? How are we going to break down those areas? What's the actual product that we're going to be offering on the different routes? Will we have to work in with partners on that? We have to look at our fleet planning. We have to look at the workforce. Do we have enough people to meet what we want, or do we have to take on more people? We then move to our advanced schedule development. Then we say, what's the infrastructure we need in terms of, for example, carts to carry baggage, refueling, the actual, and they're providing in-flight meals, etc. If our workforce is insufficient, how do we actually make up the extra numbers if we need extra numbers? Then we get to the operational schedule development. Now we know we can meet the schedule. How are we actually going to implement it? So we have to fit in with our maintenance. We have to fit in with our crew availability. We have to look at the actual aircraft we've got. We've got to look at other workforce assignments that are needed for a flight. We've got to have slots at the airport to put our aircraft into at certain times. And we have to have a budget to fulfill it. So whilst this model looks complex, it is a very logical model. And throughout the course, we've actually get to understand every one of those actual areas of the model and how they interact together. We look at equipment space assignments and the scheduled promotional activities, and then the unplanned adjustments that have to come in. Because, as we know in the airline world, nothing ever goes according to plan. Something can come up, weather can come up, equipment can come unserviceable. There could be instability in a part of the world where we have to fly around a particular country, as we've seen in 2014. We have to look at time zones. For example, if we look at North America, where we travel across the country and we find that we've got a 4-hour difference in time zones. So we don't want to make a flight scheduled to arrive in after the curfew. And so we want to use those time zones to our advantage. We have to look at the number of staff. And this graph here shows an example where we plot the number of staff and we see we've got peaks and troughs. And we say, well, if we have a stable workforce, that's going to be hard to meet. We can hire extra people in, but will they work those hours for a short time? So we have to find ways of smoothing it out. We have to also look at chain reactions. And here we see an example of a flight going from Dallas to New York. And we say, okay, that flight, when it originates at Dallas, has other flights that are probably fed into it. And then it calls at different cities along the way. And of course, it has to arrive at a time that connects with other flights there. So any change, for example, if the aircraft is late in leaving Dallas, means when it arrives at Little Rock, people may have missed their connecting flights. And so that delayed start can have a knock-on effect that causes major problems when people get to New York, where they may then be going on that connecting flights either internationally or domestically going to their own homes. We take a look at load factor. How can we make sure that we utilise every seat on board an aircraft? For example, if we look at a hardware store, the electric drill they don't sell today can be sold next day or next week. But the seat that isn't filled for the flight that's being pushed out from the gate now is a seat lost forever. That is a source of income being lost forever. So airlines have to consider what is it that makes sure that we fill as many seats as possible. And we'll look at all those different things. That is, if we have to change a schedule, passengers might say, that's inconvenient for me, I'll go to one of your competitors because I've always flown that flight for years. And of course, we'll look at all the other things that can come in. We'll look at case studies. That is, what does an airline actually do to prepare a schedule for a particular month? And we'll walk right through the system to show you just what exactly goes on, all the meetings that are held to be able to produce that schedule, right where people have to deal with particular problems. For example, it could be the availability of gates. So in this particular lecture, we cover a fair amount of the applied aspects of running an airline. What are the routes we're going to fly? How does that fit in with our strategic plan? What do we need to support a schedule to fulfil those routes? What are all the internal and external factors? That is, within the airline, and what are our competitors doing? What are the external factors, such as the hotel industry? How do we fit in with them? We'll be taking a look at all the different things that can affect our scheduling, including the different types of routes that we fly and the hub and spoke system. We'll be looking at the different scheduling types and taking a look at the way in which certain things affect the schedule itself, such as different time zones, such as knock-on effects, such as not having enough people on the ground to be able to turn aircraft around in a certain time. We'll be looking at how the scheduling department works and walking through and actually seeing what's involved in producing a particular airline schedule and all of the things that people have to do every time that they want to make a change to that schedule. This is important because it gets down to that fundamental fact that we spoke about. Every seat that you have not filled when the aircraft pushes out is income you've lost forever. That is a particular aspect of the airline industry, and airlines make sure that they minimise those empty seats as much as possible to ensure that they're staying on the profit side and therefore making money to fulfil their strategic aims. Thank you.